All right, everybody, welcome to this brand new lesson. And this is going to be the first, most elaborate example that we have so far in the course. And it is really cool. So let me just show you what the end result is of this video. And if I scroll, we have our horizontal scroller. We have a progress bar down here that is basically scrubbed to the entire duration of this horizontal scroll container. And as you can see, these two elements are kind of fading in. There's also a snap. So if I kind of just stop scrolling like right here, it's either going to go forward or backwards and snap into the next position. And you can see these elements kind of just moving into place and coming in and out with our toggle actions. And it's just a really nice, smooth experience when you're using your mouse wheel. Of course, we can also use the vertical, native scroll bar to go through this as well. And you can add extra sections at the bottom where it'll just continually, start to go back to a regular vertical scrolling position like we did in the previous, at the end of the previous lesson. So also, I'm going to show you how to do this in two different ways. This first video, I'm going to show you the way that we kind of learned in the previous lesson for the simple scroller. And then we're going to take the same exact project in the next video, and I'm going to show you an entirely different way to use to set this up using the timeline. All right. So with those two, approaches, you're going to understand, the more you understand multiple ways to do the same thing, the more flexibility it gives you in the future. You may find that it makes more sense to do it one way versus the other. But if you think about this, each slide here kind of is a sequence animation, kind of like, like a timeline-based animation for each little element that's coming in here, because we have multiple elements that kind of scroll in. So I'm going to show you both ways to do it. The first way is just going to be the simple way. There's no timeline. And I'll show you real quickly this original idea. Of course, I always design in Figma first before I try to code anything. I like to get the layout, ready to rock. And so I just have 3 desktop frames that are seated next to each other. So I took this overall layout here and I duplicated it. And then I changed a few things. I used Midjourney AI to generate some fake shoes. Obviously, I've never seen a shoe like this before. And then just changed a few things about it, like the title, this little container. My plan is to make this, scroll up as you're scrolling into each section. They're different colors, and also the background is different colors too. I mean, maybe you didn't catch that, but this is actually kind of like a light orange. This is a white, and this is a gray. And if you pay attention enough, you'll see that they actually change. The background changes slightly, so we're changing that as well based on these slides. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I do want to do, now that we're working with projects that are a little bit more complex, if you open up the before folder for this particular project, you will see there's no HTML. However, there is CSS. All the CSS that we need is right here. It's not too bad. There's not a ton of rule sets. But I want to talk about the HTML structure, because your HTML structure is very important when you're considering building things like horizontal scrollers and working with GreenSock. So we're going to talk about them. I'll revert back to the CSS, the associated rule sets for each element, the HTML element that I defined. That way you can kind of understand the pertinent parts, the parts that make the most sense, that are worth pointing out. So the first thing that I envisioned when I created this design is that the logo fit shoes and this progress bar will be fixed, position fixed in CSS. That means it's going to break outside of the regular document flow when it comes to, using display grid or display flex. They're not going to be affected by it, because like position absolute or position fixed, they're not affected by those. So where we place these elements is entirely important in the HTML. So it makes sense though. The first element you see upper left corner is the logo. So we're just going to put class logo. It's not going anywhere. And we're just going to give it fit shoes as the title. And then also the progress bar. We can just put it here as well. So I'm going to put progress. And we could use a native progress element that would be more suitable. But I set it up like this anyhow by default. We'll just call this inner. So the progress bar is kind of a container that will not be position fixed, but this is going to be position fixed in relation to this element, which I believe is position relative. So if we look at class logo, for instance, we'll see it's position fixed. That's the main thing, the kind of takeaway right here. And then we have our progress bar, which I think I have styled down here. Okay, so I was wrong. This is position fixed for the actual parent container of the inner element. And I think that's basically all we need. Notice inner, scale X I've set to 0 by default. We could also set that with gsap.set. But if I save this and I go back to our project, and it looks like maybe I get, okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Got my other stuff up here. There we go. We can see both of these elements right here. That's the progress div, and then we have fit shoes up here. So if I were to delete this, we're gonna see that's the actual progress. So we're gonna add transform scale X 0 again. All right, so now let's talk about the main content that goes inside of here. So if you look back here, the main content is basically this right here. And each one of these, this whole layout right here, again, excluding the logo and this progress bar, you can think of, you basically want to have an element that wraps around everything. And then we want an element that wraps around all three of these sections. So if you think about it in terms of rectangles, here's the rectangle 1, 2, and 3 that wraps around all that stuff. And then we have another one that wraps around all of that, okay? And the reason being is because we need those three elements to have, or these three pieces of layout essentially, to have a wrapper around it so we can do display flex and make them into columns instead of stacked rows. So we're gonna give a class of, we'll just call this a slider. And then inside of here, our three sections are gonna be section elements. So our three layouts essentially. So we're gonna have three of these sections, and they're gonna basically be styled or constructed exactly the same. So inside of here, we're gonna have basically a 2-column approach with, and by the way, this would be 1 column. And then this over here, the right call will be the right column. And then the image, if I remember correctly, is going to be a position absolute. If I can find it here, where's my image? Oh, right there. Yep, position absolute, and then I'm just giving them a width, a height, or a right rather, and then a top. And then this right here just allows me to center it vertically as well, okay? So scale X -1 will flip a image the other way. I decided to do that. Okay, so we're gonna have a parent container that wraps around both pieces of type, the title as well as the paragraph. The title, I want to use the mask technique. So I'm gonna add a mask around it. We've done this a million times. H1, lifting soles X100, like maybe that's the model or something. All right, so that's that piece of type, and then we have our paragraph type. All right, so I'm just going to copy and paste just some type that I had already, like that. Now if I save this and go back, we'll see this is what we're left with so far. It does not look good, but that's because we're lacking the rest of the markup. So after that column right here, we're gonna put in our right column. So, all right, so that's our right column. And guess what? We just leave it empty, that's fine. And then we have our image. Again, that's position absolute. So it's not in the regular flow. That's shoe 1, we'll just do lifting shoe X100 or something. Okay, so we'll save that. All right, and that is what we have so far. Of course, it's not ready and looking good just yet, but we'll get that ready to rock here. One thing, I think the one thing I messed up is I did leave out one area of concern. Our 2 columns is actually wrapped in a main element. I'm sorry about that. That was my bad. What we want to do is wrap all that stuff in a main element right there. Okay, so now here's our 2 columns. Our first column's here, second column's here, and then this is outside of the regular document flow because they're position absolute. It still doesn't look right because we don't have the other sections. So if I just take this section, we're going to copy and paste that. This will be shoe 2. This will be X200. Another thing I wanted to do is, because we want to change the background color, we can define on this second section a custom attribute, custom data attribute. So it starts with a data hyphen. You always need to include that. And then whatever you want to name it. So BG hyphen color equals white. So for this second section, we're going to make the background white. And this is how we're communicating the color value right here. And we'll get that in JavaScript later. It's not going to change yet. And then we're going to take that section, paste that one more time. This time we're going to put in an actual hex value, E9, E9, E9. It's kind of like a very light gray. This would be X300. This is shoe 3. X3, this one's X2, there we go. Now let's save it, there we go. Now, this doesn't look correct and the scrolling isn't working, but don't worry because there is a display flex on here. There's 3 others over off to the side. All right, so now that we have that, and again, I would really advise just going through the CSS just to understand what is happening here. Again, like the slider, for instance, is the main parent container around everything. We have a width of 300 viewport width because there's 3 sections. It's display flex to get them in columns. Each section has a height of 100 viewport height with a display of flex because we have 2 columns in each one, starting with main. And then we have our H1 and paragraph, and then our right column. By default, we have it this color. We're going to change those colors as well per section. And yeah, we're doing pretty good. Oh yeah, red and dark right here. These right here I did not include yet. So basically what we want to do is we want to apply a class onto the right call of the second section and the third section. So right here we're going to say red. And then this one is going to be dark. There we go. Can't see those yet because we can't see sections 2 and 3. All right, so let's go ahead and switch gears, and now we're going to go ahead and focus on the JavaScript. So the first thing we're going to do is get access to the slider class. So document.query. There we go, class slider. And then also we want to get our sections. There's 3 of them. So gsap utils to array, and we say slider section. Okay, so now we have access to all of our sections and the slider, the parent container. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get this vertical or the horizontal scrolling portion working first. And we're going to tie that to an actual property called scroll tween, kind of how we did previously. So let scroll tween equals gsap2. We put in our sections, and then we put x%, remember -100 times sections.length, that gives how many sections. In this case it's 3, but we put -1 as well. Also put ease none. Again, this is all from the previous lesson. And then we define a scroll trigger. The trigger is going to be the slider itself, which we've defined up here as a constant. We're going to have pin true. Each section will be pinned. Scrub will be 1. And then snap. If you want them to snap to the sections, we're going to add a snap. We're not going to do that just yet. And then we're also going to have an end value. And that is going to be our little function here, plus equals slider dot offset width. All right. So if I save this, we'll see if it works at all. There we go. Now notice it's not snapping to the sections because I haven't enabled that part yet. Also, a scroll bar status indicator isn't working either, but that's okay. We'll get that fixed in a second. So to get the snapping work, we say snap. We just take 1 divided by sections.length minus 1. Same thing, similar to up above in the X%. And now if I just stop randomly, it's going to move over to the adjacent section for us automatically. And that's up to you if you want to include that or not. Okay. After that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to iterate through our sections. Sections.forEach. We're going to pass in this section. We get access to each of the 3 sections we currently have. And then we just use a gsap from method. And we're going to say, in this part's real important, we're going to scope it. Just like we did with that H1 value in the previous lesson, we need to scope the various elements. We can't just put, like I said before, an H1 here because it will grab all H1s that it finds. We want the one that's scoped specific to the section that's being iterated over in this for each. So what we do here is we say section.querySelector, and then we put in H1. Okay, now we're going to say it's going to go to Y% 135. Remember, it's wrapped around that mask element, so it'll come from nowhere, seemingly. And then we're also going to put in a scroll trigger. Because this is not tied to a timeline, this right here, this scroll trigger doesn't affect it. Okay, so very important to understand that. So for this scroll trigger, essentially we're going to say container animation is scroll tween. Remember, we covered this process in the last video, so hopefully you watched that. This basically allows this scroll trigger to work in such a way that will work with the horizontal scrolling that's been defined up here for this section. So you have to add that. And then we're also going to put trigger. And this trigger here for us is going to be the H1 itself. All right, so again, we would want to reference this for the trigger. And then we can also put start, left, center. And then toggle actions is going to be play, none, none, reverse. So let's save that and let's see what happens. So, oh no, it's not working. So that's okay. If it doesn't work sometimes, that is completely all right. We're going to make sure we have no gsap target null not found. Okay. So why is that exact? Oh, it's because I put a class right there. I'm sorry. Delete those little periods next to H1. All right, so now notice how each one comes in sequentially, and they fade out as well. So if I kind of zoom up, you can see a little bit better. Very nice. Okay, so if we wanted to animate like the paragraph, for instance, we would have to copy this and then just say paragraph. Maybe this is Y% 50 with an opacity 0. And then nothing else essentially would change, except we're going to change this to a paragraph element and make it start at the same time with the less than sign. So if we save this, there we go. So if I scroll back, you'll see how each one comes in. But this is rather verbose. I mean, we're not changing anything except for the selector for the trigger element, right? So we can basically create a function for us to kind of make less verbose code. So what we'll do is create a constant called common scroll trigger equals. We're going to let them pass in a trigger element because that's the one thing that changes. And inside of here, we're going to simply paste all this stuff. All right, let's shift tab these back. And this is going to be the trigger element, which is passed in up here. And I think we're good for that amount right there. So now we can just take scroll trigger, call common scroll trigger, and then pass in our section H1. So now I just copy this. This one's going to be paragraph. All right. So now if we save it, the results should be the same. Go back. And there we go. So now all we have to do is just copy this code essentially for each of the other things that we want to animate, like the image, for instance. We'll take the image, and then for that image, we're going to do the same thing, same exact thing. Opacity is going to be 0, Y%. This time we're just going to use Y, and that will be 50. All right. So let's save that. Go back. Now this one, for the image, I'm going to remove that value right there. Now they're going to come in basically around the same time. So if I go over here, actually it didn't come in around the same time. There's a sort of a delay, but I think we'll be able to fix that with subsequent tweens here. So we'll come back to that just to make sure it is definitely working. So this is going to be a GSAP2. We're going to change the body here, the body color. So we're going to say GSAP2. We're going to get our body selector. We're going to say background color is going to be, and the way we get this is we reference the section right up here, and we say dataset BG color. The way that works, camel case, this up here, the data attribute value that we gave it, which is data BG color, you remove the hyphen, and you just remove it entirely and then capitalize the next word, BG color, so capital C. Alrighty, and then one last time, we have our scroll trigger as well. And this is just going to be, the scroll trigger in this case is just going to be the section. There we go. So we'll save that. So you can see we have a gray one. This one was supposed to turn, let's see here, white. There we go, white, and then gray. And then we'll do one more with the right column, which is the bar that's on the right-hand side. This is going to be a from as well. And this is going to say right call. And this will be a right. No, actually, no. We're going to make this one, the scroll trigger, the section itself as well. So you can have different scroll triggers, even though we're selecting an entirely different element, or we're animating an entirely different element as well. For this one, we're just going to do a scale Y. And it's going from 0. And then finally, transform origin will be bottom. Let's save it. All right, so let's refresh. Let's go back up. You can see that growing in. And our images over here is still kind of not working correctly. I'm going to have to figure out what exactly is the issue, because that should not be happening on that. Oh, I think I know what the issue is. For this one, we're just going to use a section as well. So it's only the first two scroll triggers that we're using the same element, the paragraph here, the H1 here. But this one, we're just going to use the section to target. Now it should work properly. All the shoes will come into place roughly the same time. There we go. Now the final thing that we need to do to get working is this progress bar, and it's actually super, super simple. The progress bar, there's only one of them, so we come outside of the sections for each statement, and all we have to do is just say GSAP to inner, And remember, inner is the actual orange progress portion right here. It's this element right there. Scrolling back down, all we have to say is remember, we're using the 2, so 2 scale x 1, because right now it's 0. And we're also going to say a scroll trigger, and this is so simple, scrub 0.33333. Because we know that there's 3 different elements. And we could do this programmatically as well. But if we just save this and I go back, take a look at the actual progress bar. And it will work and respond to with the snapping as well. Very, very, very cool. All right, and that is the first way of creating this very cool interaction. So now in the next video, we're gonna leave all the markup in the HTML and the CSS exactly the same, but I'm gonna show you a way to do this with the timeline, which will greatly reduce the amount of code in order to achieve something like this.